The billionaire was not a man who wasted time. Every day of his life followed a strict routine. He usually woke up at 6 in the morning, exercised for an hour, read financial reports, and then prepared for meetings. His mansion was always quiet at that hour, and the staff knew exactly how the morning should flow. But on this particular day, something was different. He opened his eyes at 4:30 without an alarm. The room was still dark, and the city outside his tall glass windows was asleep. He lay in bed for a few seconds, staring at the ceiling, wondering why he felt so restless. It was not fear, and it was not stress. It was a strange feeling he could not explain. He slowly sat up and looked around his large bedroom. The soft golden lamps near his bed were off, the air conditioner hummed quietly, everything looked normal, yet he felt uncomfortable. He decided not to force himself back to sleep. Instead, he got up, put on his robe, and walked toward the window. From the window, he could see the lights of the city shining far away. Normally, this view made him feel powerful and proud. He had built his empire from nothing, and every light in that city reminded him of success. But today, the view felt distant, cold, almost lonely. He turned away and walked out of his bedroom. His footsteps echoed slightly in the long marble hallway. The mansion was huge, with high ceilings and expensive paintings on the walls. At this early hour, it felt even bigger and emptier than usual. The night guards were outside, and most of the indoor staff would not wake up for another hour. As he walked down the stairs, he noticed how silent everything was. No sound of dishes in the kitchen, no quiet chatter between workers, no smell of fresh coffee. The house felt frozen in time. He told himself he was being dramatic. It was just an early morning, nothing more. Still, he could not ignore the strange tension in his chest. Instead of going to his home gym like he normally did, he decided to walk toward the kitchen. Maybe a glass of water would help clear his mind. The kitchen lights were dim, but one small light above the sink was on. That caught his attention immediately. Someone was awake. He slowed his steps without realizing it. The soft sound of movement reached his ears. It sounded like someone carefully placing something on the counter. He stepped inside the kitchen and paused at the doorway. There, near the sink, stood his maid. She was one of the most hard-working employees in the house, always quiet, always respectful, always on time. Her name was known to everyone in the staff, but she rarely spoke about her personal life. She seemed surprised to see him. Her body stiffened slightly, as if she had not expected anyone to enter. She quickly lowered her eyes and greeted him softly. "Good morning, sir," she said. Her voice sounded normal, but something about it felt different. It was weaker, almost tired. He nodded and walked toward the refrigerator, pretending everything was normal, but as he poured himself a glass of water, he noticed her movements. She was working slowly, carefully, as if every small action required extra effort. Usually, she moved quickly and confidently, preparing breakfast ingredients before the rest of the staff arrived. Today, her shoulders looked heavy, and her hands trembled slightly when she picked up a cup. He took a sip of water and glanced at her again. This time, he noticed she avoided turning fully toward him. She kept her face slightly angled away. A quiet thought crossed his mind: something is wrong. He did not know why he felt that way. He was a businessman, trained to notice details, to observe small changes in behavior. That skill had helped him build his fortune, and now, that same instinct was telling him that this early morning was not ordinary. The kitchen clock ticked loudly on the wall. Each second felt slower than usual. He placed his glass on the counter and looked at her more carefully. She seemed nervous, almost afraid, though he had never raised his voice at her or any staff member without reason. The tension in the room grew heavier, even though neither of them spoke. Outside, the first light of dawn began to appear through the windows. A soft blue color filled the sky, signaling the start of a new day. For most people, it would be just another morning, but for him, something had already shifted. He did not know that this simple decision to wake up early would change not only her life, but his as well. As he stood there in the quiet kitchen, holding his empty glass, he realized that this unusual morning was the beginning of something he never expected, something that would test his character far more than any business challenge ever had. The sound came first, not the sight. a small sharp clink of porcelain hitting marble, too sudden in the quiet kitchen. The billionaire turned his head slowly, his eyes were trained to notice small disruptions. In boardrooms, tiny reactions revealed million-dollar secrets, and right now, something in this room felt just as serious. The maid quickly bent down to pick up the spoon she had dropped. Her movements were rushed, almost panicked. As she straightened, the sleeve of her uniform slid slightly down her arm. That was when he saw it. A dark purple mark near her wrist, half hidden, yet impossible to ignore. His expression did not change immediately. Years of business negotiations had taught him control, but inside, something tightened. Bruises like that did not appear without reason. She noticed his gaze, her hand instantly pulled the sleeve back into place, her breathing became uneven, and she turned toward the sink as if the running water could wash away the moment. "Are you all right?" he asked calmly. It was a simple question, soft, controlled, not accusing, not dramatic. "I'm fine, sir," she replied quickly, too quickly. Her answer felt rehearsed, like a line she had practiced many times before. He stepped closer, not in anger, but in quiet observation. The early morning light now entered the kitchen windows, and the soft glow made everything clearer, too clear. When she reached for a plate on the shelf, the fabric of her sleeve shifted again, this time revealing more than just one mark. There were faint yellow and blue shadows along her forearm, signs of older injuries trying to fade. The air between them felt heavier. He had seen struggle before, he had grown up with nothing, fought through hardship, faced betrayal, but this was different. This was silent pain standing just a few feet away from him, trying desperately to hide. She kept her head lowered, pretending to focus on arranging dishes, but her hands were shaking. In that moment, the power difference between them felt uncomfortable. He owned the mansion, the company, the wealth, while she stood there in a simple uniform, trying to protect her dignity. He lowered his voice even more. "You don't have to be afraid," he said. Her fingers froze on the edge of the counter. "I'm not afraid, sir," she whispered, but her voice betrayed her. Silence filled the kitchen again, only the ticking clock dared to make noise. He realized something important then: fear does not always shout, sometimes it stands quietly, hoping no one notices. He walked to the dining table and pulled out a chair, sitting down slowly, not as an employer giving orders, but as a man trying to understand. "Come here," he said gently. She hesitated for 2 long seconds before turning around. Her face was pale in the morning light, and as she stepped forward, he noticed something else, a faint bruise near the corner of her cheek, carefully covered with makeup, but still visible if one looked closely. His jaw tightened. This was no accident. He felt anger rising inside him, not the loud explosive kind, but the cold controlled anger that built slowly and powerfully. "Who did this?" he asked. She immediately shook her head. "No one, sir, I slipped, it's nothing." The explanation sounded weak, almost fragile. He had negotiated with powerful rivals who lied with confidence, and here she was, unable to even make the lie believable. He stood up again, but kept his distance. He did not want to intimidate her. "You don't slip in the same place more than once," he said quietly. Her eyes filled with tears instantly, as if his words had broken a wall she had been holding up for months. She turned away, trying to wipe her face quickly, ashamed of being seen like this. "I can still work, sir," she said, her voice cracking. "Please don't send me away." That sentence hit him harder than anything else. She was not afraid of pain, she was afraid of losing her job. In that moment, he understood the depth of her situation. Whatever was happening outside this house was bad enough, but losing this job would make it worse. The billionaire looked around his grand kitchen, the expensive marble counters, the shining appliances, the luxury that surrounded them, and suddenly it all felt meaningless compared to the silent suffering standing in front of him. This was no longer just about bruises, it was about fear, survival, and dignity. He realized that this early morning had brought him face to face with a reality he had never truly seen inside his own home. And deep inside, he knew one thing clearly. He was not going to ignore it. She had mastered the art of silence long before this morning. For months, she had moved through the mansion like a shadow, efficient and invisible, doing her work perfectly so no one would look too closely. Pain had become part of her daily routine, just like washing dishes and polishing floors. But today, the silence felt fragile. After his last question, the room seemed too small to hold the truth any longer. She kept her back turned to him, staring at the sink. Though the water had stopped running minutes ago, her reflection in the steel surface looked unfamiliar even to herself. He did not speak again immediately. He understood pressure. In business, pushing too hard at the wrong moment could destroy a deal, and right now, this was not about money, this was about trust. He stepped back slightly, giving her space. "Take your time," he said quietly. Those 3 words almost broke her. No one had said that to her in a long time, not at home, where anger filled every room, not in the small apartment where every sound made her anxious, not even in her own thoughts. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. She felt a battle inside her chest, one voice telling her to stay quiet, to protect herself, to survive, the other voice whispering that maybe, just maybe, this was the moment to speak. She turned around slowly, her eyes were red now, but she tried to stand straight. "It's nothing serious," she said again, but this time her voice was softer, weaker. He looked at her carefully, not with suspicion, but with concern. "Bruises are never nothing," he replied. The words hung in the air, heavy and honest. For a second, she almost smiled sadly, as if she admired his certainty. If only life were that simple. "You wouldn't understand, sir," she said quietly. He did not react with pride or offense. Instead, he surprised her. "Then help me understand," he said. That answer caught her off guard. Most people in power demanded explanations, they did not ask for understanding. She looked down at her hands. The faint marks on her skin seemed louder than her thoughts. She remembered the arguments, the shouting, the apologies that came too late, the promises that were always broken. "I just fall sometimes," she whispered, but even she did not believe her own words anymore. He walked to the window and looked outside, giving her another moment. Dawn had fully arrived now, the sky was brighter, but the light did not make the situation easier. "Does someone hurt you?" he asked gently, still facing the window. The directness of the question made her heart race. She had avoided hearing those words out loud for so long, saying it would make it real. Tears rolled down her cheeks before she could stop them. She quickly wiped them away, embarrassed. "I don't want problems, sir," she said. "I need this job." There it was again, not denial, not anger, just fear. He turned around slowly, studying her expression. In that moment, he realized something painful. She believed keeping quiet was safer than telling the truth. "You think speaking up will cost you everything," he said calmly. She did not answer, but her silence confirmed it. For years, he had built companies by solving problems directly, quickly, strategically, but this was not a contract dispute or a failing investment. This was a human life standing in front of him, shaped by fear. He walked toward the kitchen table again and rested his hands on the chair. "No one in this house will lose their job for being honest," he said firmly. She looked up at him, searching his face for doubt or hidden conditions. She found none. "My husband," she began, and then stopped. The word felt heavy. He waited. "He gets angry," she continued softly. "Sometimes he drinks, sometimes he thinks I talk too much, sometimes he thinks I don't talk enough." Her words came out slowly, as if each one hurt. "And when he's angry?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. She nodded slightly, unable to say more. The truth was finally in the room, not fully spoken, but understood. A strange mix of emotions crossed his face, anger at the unseen man who caused this, frustration at the injustice, and something deeper, a sense of responsibility. She quickly added, "It's not always bad. He says he's sorry after. He promises it won't happen again." Hope and fear were fighting in her voice. He had heard similar patterns before, in stories on the news, in charity reports he barely had time to read, but now it was no longer distant. It was standing in his kitchen at 5 in the morning. "You don't deserve that," he said quietly. The simplicity of the statement made her break down completely. because deep inside, she had started to believe she did. The early morning had started with confusion and restlessness, but now it had revealed something much bigger. This was not just about Bruises anymore. It was about breaking a cycle. And both of them understood that once the truth was spoken, even softly, nothing would remain the same. The truth did not come out all at once, it came in pieces, like broken glass slowly falling to the floor. After she said the word husband, the room felt colder, even though the sun had fully risen, a strange shadow remained between them. She sat down without being asked, as if her legs could no longer hold the weight of what she had been carrying. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers tightly locked together. For years, she had protected her secret carefully. At work, she was dependable and quiet. At home, she was careful and smaller than her own shadow. She had learned how to read moods, how to avoid arguments, how to stay silent when silence was safer. But this morning, something inside her had shifted. Maybe it was the calm way he listened, maybe it was the simple sentence, "You don't deserve that," or maybe she was just tired of pretending. "He wasn't always like this," she said slowly, staring at the floor. "When we got married, he was kind." Her voice carried a soft memory, almost hopeful. The billionaire remained standing, not interrupting, not judging, just listening. "He lost his job 2 years ago," she continued. "After that, everything changed." She described how the frustration began as silence, then turned into anger, then the anger started looking for someone to blame, and she was always there. At first, it was just shouting, she explained, then pushing, then. She stopped, but the unfinished sentence said enough. He felt his hands clench into fists at his sides, not because he wanted to scare her, but because the image forming in his mind was unbearable. She quickly added, almost defending her abuser, "He says he feels useless, he says he doesn't mean to hurt me." It was clear she had repeated those excuses to herself many times. "Does he hurt anyone else?" the billionaire asked carefully. Her eyes widened slightly. "No, never our son," she replied quickly. A protective tone filled her voice. "He loves him." That detail made the situation even more complicated, pain mixed with love, fear mixed with loyalty. She explained how she hid the bruises with long sleeves, how she left home earlier than necessary to avoid morning arguments, how she smiled at work so no one would ask questions. "I thought I could handle it," she whispered. "If I just stayed quiet, maybe it would stop." But it had not stopped, it had grown worse. Last night had been different, she admitted it in a trembling voice. The argument had started over something small, something meaningless, but his anger had been stronger than before, louder, more violent. "When I looked in the mirror this morning, I almost didn't recognize myself," she said softly. The billionaire finally sat down across from her. The large kitchen table suddenly felt less like a place for meals and more like a place for truth. "You came to work anyway," he said. She nodded. "I needed to." That simple answer held so much strength and so much sadness at the same time. She needed the job, not just for money, but for stability, for a few hours each day where she felt safe, where she felt like more than someone's target. "I never told anyone," she admitted, "not my neighbors, not my family. I was ashamed." Ashamed, the word echoed in the room. He understood something important then. Abuse was not just physical, it was psychological. It made victims feel guilty for the pain they did not cause. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," he said firmly. She looked at him as if those words were unfamiliar, as if she had never heard them directed at her before. Tears rolled down her face again, but this time they were different, not just tears of fear, but tears of release. "I didn't want pity," she said, "and I didn't want to be a problem." He leaned forward slightly. "You are not a problem," he replied, "you are a person who deserves safety." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence now felt different from before. It was no longer heavy with secrets, it was heavy with realization. By telling the truth, even in fragments, she had crossed a line she could not uncross. The situation was no longer hidden in darkness, it was out in the open, breathing in the morning light. She looked around the luxurious kitchen, perhaps wondering how two worlds could exist at the same time, one filled with wealth and security, the other filled with fear and uncertainty. "I don't know what to do," she admitted honestly. And that was the real heart of it, not just what had happened, but what would happen next. The billionaire understood that listening was only the first step. The truth had been revealed, raw and painful. Now came the part that would truly define him. Because knowing the truth created responsibility. And he was not the kind of man who ignored responsibility. The moment the truth settled between them, something changed inside him. Until now, he had been listening as an employer, as a concerned observer, but in that quiet kitchen, watching her wipe tears she had hidden for months, he felt something far more personal awaken. He had built his empire on one belief: when there is a problem, you act. In business, delay meant loss, hesitation meant weakness, and silence often protected the wrong people. He stood up slowly, but this time there was a new energy in his posture, calm, controlled, but decisive. She noticed the shift immediately. Her heart began to race again. She feared she had said too much. "Sir, please," she said quickly, "I don't want trouble." He looked at her, not with anger, but with clarity. "The trouble already exists," he replied, "you are just living inside it." His voice was steady, each word carefully measured. She felt both comforted and terrified at the same time. For years she had survived by keeping things small and hidden, and now, he was thinking bigger than she ever dared to. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Her eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "Making sure this ends," he said simply. But he did not dial the police immediately as she feared. He was not impulsive. He understood that protection required strategy. Instead, he called his personal security director, a former law enforcement officer who handled sensitive matters quietly and professionally. "I need you at the house," he said calmly, "now." No details were shared over the phone, but his tone was enough. When he ended the call, the kitchen felt different again, not tense, not fragile, but charged with purpose. She stood up suddenly, panic rising. "If he finds out I told someone." "He will not touch you again," the billionaire interrupted, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a certainty that made her fall silent. It was not an empty promise, it was a decision. He began asking practical questions. "Where does he work now? Does he have access to your bank account? Is your son at school today?" Each question surprised her, not because they were harsh, but because they were protective. She answered slowly, still unsure if this was really happening. Her husband had been unemployed for months, doing temporary jobs, controlling most of the finances, often checking her phone, questioning her every move. The billionaire listened carefully, already building a plan in his mind. "I should go home early today," she said nervously. "If I'm late, he gets suspicious." "You are not going home today," he replied firmly. Her breath caught in her throat. "But my son." "He will be picked up safely," he said, already typing another message on his phone. She stared at him in disbelief. This was moving too fast, too big, too powerful. For someone who had felt powerless for so long, sudden protection felt almost unreal. Within minutes, arrangements began forming. His legal advisor was contacted, a private driver was placed on standby, a safe apartment owned by one of his companies was prepared quietly, no public records, no easy trace. He was not just reacting emotionally, he was restructuring her reality. She felt overwhelmed. "Why are you doing this for me?" she asked softly. He paused at that question. It was simple, but important. "Because I can," he answered, "and because no one stopped it before." That truth hung heavily in the air. He thought about how many times he had read reports about domestic abuse in newspapers, how often society looked away, calling it a private matter. But standing here now, it did not feel private, it felt urgent. A black security vehicle quietly entered the driveway outside, visible through the kitchen window. Her hands began to shake again. "This is real," she whispered. "Yes," he said, "it is." The security director entered respectfully, taking in the situation quickly without unnecessary questions. The billionaire gave clear instructions: discreet relocation, immediate legal consultation, documentation of injuries, protection order preparation. Everything was happening with calm efficiency. She watched, stunned, as her life began shifting direction in a single morning. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar rising inside her, not fear, not shame, but hope. And that was perhaps the most shocking part of all. The billionaire was not shouting, not threatening revenge, not creating drama. He was simply using his power to protect instead of ignore. And in that quiet, controlled response, everyone who would later hear about this morning would understand something powerful. True strength is not shown in domination. It is shown in the decision to stand between harm and the person who cannot stand alone. By noon, her old life was already slipping away like a fading shadow. What had started as a quiet, painful confession in the kitchen had turned into a carefully organized rescue, but nothing about it felt dramatic or loud. There were no flashing lights, no shouting, no public scene, only quiet efficiency and controlled urgency. She sat in the back seat of a black security vehicle, her small bag resting on her lap. The bag contained only a few clothes and important documents. It felt strange that her entire world could fit into something so small. Beside her sat a female security officer, calm and reassuring, speaking gently about where they were going, a private apartment owned by one of the billionaire's companies, fully furnished, safe, temporary but comfortable. She looked out the window as the mansion disappeared behind them, her heart beat fast, not from fear of being hurt again, but from fear of change. Change was unfamiliar. Even painful routines can feel safer than the unknown. Meanwhile, inside his home office, the billionaire was moving just as quickly. His desk was covered not with business contracts, but with legal documents and contact numbers. His legal team had arrived within the hour. He gave clear instructions: file for an emergency protection order, arrange medical documentation of injuries, secure temporary financial support in her name only, ensure custody safety for her son. There was no hesitation in his voice. For years, he had used strategy to protect assets and grow investments. Today, he was using that same intelligence to protect a human life. By early afternoon, her son had been safely picked up from school, confused at first, but quickly comforted when he saw his mother waiting in the secure apartment. When the door closed behind them, she finally allowed herself to breathe fully. The apartment was simple but beautiful. Sunlight filled the living room, clean furniture, fresh bedding, a small balcony with a city view. It felt unreal. Her son hugged her tightly, unaware of the full truth, but sensing something important had changed. "Are we moving?" he asked innocently. For a little while, she replied softly, kissing his forehead. Back at the mansion, the household staff had begun to notice unusual activity: security coming and going, lawyers entering through the private gate, quiet whispers spreading. But no one dared to ask direct questions. By evening, news had quietly reached her husband, not from her, but from a formal legal notice delivered to his apartment. He had reacted with anger, then disbelief, then panic. He had never expected her silence to break. And he certainly had never expected someone powerful to step into what he believed was his private territory. That night, as she sat on the new sofa in the safe apartment, her phone buzzed repeatedly with missed calls and angry messages. She stared at the screen, her hands shaking slightly. The billionaire had anticipated this. A new phone had already been arranged, with secure contacts only. "You are not alone in this process," his legal advisor had told her earlier. "Every step will be handled properly." For the first time, she began to understand what protection truly meant. Not just physical safety, but legal, emotional, and financial stability. Later that evening, the billionaire himself arrived at the apartment, not with cameras, not with attention, just quietly. He stepped inside and looked around to ensure everything was in place. Her son watched him with curiosity, unaware that this man had just changed their future. "Is everything comfortable?" he asked gently. She nodded, unable to fully express her gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You don't need to," he replied, "just focus on healing." Healing, the word felt unfamiliar. For so long, survival had been her only goal. She had not even considered healing. As he prepared to leave, he paused near the door. "This is only the beginning," he said. "We will make sure this never happens to you again." His words were not dramatic, they were calm, firm, final. After he left, she stood by the window of the apartment, looking at the city lights below. They looked different tonight, warmer somehow. Earlier that morning, she had walked into work carrying bruises and fear. Now, she stood in safety, with legal protection in motion and a future slowly rebuilding itself. It felt overwhelming, almost too fast. But deep inside, beneath the exhaustion and shock, something powerful had started to grow. Hope. And sometimes, hope begins not with loud revenge or public drama, but with quiet action taken at exactly the right moment. By the following week, the quiet act of protection had begun to ripple far beyond the walls of the apartment. The billionaire, usually consumed by board meetings, investments, and public appearances, had made a decision that would surprise everyone around him. He refused to let this incident remain hidden, not in the way that sought attention, but in a way that demanded accountability. He called his personal assistant into his office, a large, glass-walled room filled with awards, stock charts, and expensive art. "We need to do more than just protect one person," he said, his voice steady. "This affects more people than we know." His assistant looked at him, unsure. "Are you talking about going public?" "Not for show," he replied, "for action. We will create a foundation, a program, something that ensures domestic workers and vulnerable employees are protected. Legally, financially, emotionally. Everyone deserves safety." It was a decision that surprised even his closest advisors. Many thought billionaires avoided controversy, but he had seen enough injustice to understand the responsibility that came with power. The legal team began drafting the documents for a non-profit. Funding was allocated immediately. Programs were designed for safe housing, legal support, and counseling. Staff training programs were developed to ensure employees could safely report abuse, and protocols were created for quick action, just like what had happened for her. The story, though still private, began to circulate quietly among his staff, and then through carefully monitored channels to the media, highlighting the positive impact of proactive protection for employees without revealing personal identities. She, meanwhile, had begun to adjust to her new life, her son smiling more easily, her steps lighter in the apartment that now felt like a home. For the first time, she could imagine a future without fear. When the foundation was officially announced, the billionaire attended quietly, sitting in the back of the room as journalists and employees celebrated the initiative. He did not speak much, letting the work speak for itself. The impact was immediate. Social workers contacted the foundation for support. Workers came forward to report abuse they had hidden for years. The program expanded faster than anyone had anticipated. Inside the secure apartment, she watched from a distance, feeling a strange mix of humility and hope. Her life had been transformed, yes, but she realized the ripple effect could help countless others. The billionaire had turned what could have been a private act of charity into a public lesson on responsibility, courage, and accountability. The story spread quietly online, reaching social media feeds, articles, and eventually inspiring others in positions of power to take similar action. It was a moment that reshaped public perception of what leadership could be, not just about profits or influence, but about human compassion translated into concrete action. Meanwhile, at her old neighborhood, whispers of the events reached some of her former friends and neighbors. Though she had left quietly, the message of protection and support began to challenge long-held fears. The example set by someone so powerful made others believe that change was possible. Her abuser, meanwhile, had been legally restrained, unable to contact or approach her, his anger replaced by the cold reality that control and fear no longer ruled her life. At night, she often sat with her son on the balcony, staring at the city lights, reflecting on how quickly her world had shifted, from fear and hiding to safety and hope, from silence to empowerment. And in the quiet moments, she thought of him, the billionaire who had chosen not just to observe, but to act, the man whose calm, calculated, yet human response had not only saved her but sparked something bigger than any of them had imagined. In the weeks that followed, the media highlighted similar stories, and the foundation began partnering with other organizations, creating a network of protection for domestic workers. Women who had felt powerless were finally finding their voices, men who had abused in silence were confronted legally, publicly, and effectively. Through it all, the billionaire remained quietly in the background, preferring that the stories be about the lives changed, not about him. But everywhere people spoke, everywhere social media buzzed, everywhere employees whispered in safe spaces, they mentioned the courage it took to act decisively, the humanity it took to care beyond the limits of duty or obligation. And in that moment, it became clear, true influence is measured not in wealth or titles, but in the lives you change. One quiet morning in a kitchen had triggered a chain of events that reached far beyond the walls of a mansion, far beyond one bruised woman, far beyond a single family. It had become a movement, a reminder, a story that would inspire others to act. Not with violence, not with anger, but with courage, strategy, and compassion. And for her son, and for countless others, the world had suddenly grown bigger, safer, and brighter than they had ever dared to imagine. Months had passed since that quiet morning in the kitchen, yet the memory of it remained vivid for both of them. The apartment where she and her son had taken refuge had become more than a temporary shelter, it had grown into a place of safety, stability, and slowly, even happiness. Every morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, reflecting off polished floors, and she would take a deep breath, realizing that the fear that had once controlled her life was finally gone. Her son thrived in this new environment, laughing freely, asking endless questions about the city from the balcony, and discovering a world beyond the walls of their old apartment. Watching him, she felt a sense of peace she had not known in years, a peace built not just on survival, but on hope for the future. She began to see herself differently, too, not as someone who needed to hide, but as a person with agency, strength, and worth. The billionaire continued his quiet oversight, checking in on her and ensuring that everything was progressing smoothly. He did not interfere unnecessarily, nor did he seek recognition for his actions. Instead, he focused on the foundation he had launched, watching it grow steadily as more cases of domestic abuse were brought to light and resolved. The initiative had expanded beyond legal support and safe housing. It offered counseling, job training, and educational programs for children, creating a network of protection that reached far beyond a single household. Despite his usual busy schedule, he made a point to personally follow up on her case, ensuring her safety and the well-being of her son. His calm, methodical approach had inspired trust in her that was unlike anything she had experienced before. For the first time, she realized that someone in power could use their influence to create real, tangible change in people's lives, not just profits or prestige. Word of the foundation's impact began to spread. Stories of women and children finding safety and reclaiming their lives appeared quietly in newspapers, social media, and word of mouth, each narrative reinforcing the message that abuse could not be hidden and that justice was possible. The billionaire's discreet leadership style became an example of how power, when used responsibly, could reshape society. One evening, she sat on the balcony with her son, watching the city lights twinkle below. He leaned against her shoulder, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had escaped the cycle of fear and violence, and for the first time, she was free to dream about what life could hold. Her son's laughter reminded her that safety was not just about protection, it was about reclaiming joy. Occasionally, she thought about the past, the bruises, the arguments, the nights of fear. But now, those memories served a different purpose. They reminded her of how far she had come, of the strength she had found within herself, and of the unexpected ally who had refused to look away. She realized that trauma could not define her life, her courage, choices, and support system now defined her reality. The billionaire had remained a constant, quiet presence, his actions speaking louder than any words could. Through his response, he had not only protected her life but also ignited a movement of awareness and accountability. She began volunteering with the foundation herself, guiding other women through the same process she had once feared. Helping them find safety and reclaim their dignity brought her a sense of purpose she had never known before. Her journey became a story of transformation, not just for herself and her son, but for everyone touched by the foundation's work. What began as an ordinary morning had become a turning point, a moment where courage met compassion, and a decision changed countless lives. She had been given a chance to start over, and she embraced it fully, knowing that freedom and safety were not gifts to be taken lightly, they were battles won, moments by moments. As the months turned into a year, the kitchen in that mansion remained in her memory as the place where everything shifted, the place where someone finally chose to act rather than ignore. She often reflected on the power of human empathy when combined with decisive action. The billionaire's choice to intervene had not just saved her life, it had sparked a chain reaction of change, inspiring others to stand up, to protect, and to challenge injustice wherever it appeared. Ultimately, she realized that life was no longer about surviving quietly. It was about living boldly, protecting what mattered, and helping others find the courage to do the same. She looked at her son, smiled, and whispered to herself, "We are safe now. And we will thrive." Her past no longer defined her, her future, filled with hope, strength, and resilience, had only just begun.